Hi, this is Heidi Rataj, your host for User Friendly. Our production team is working hard to bring you new episodes for Season 2, which will launch in mid-February. However, we didn't want to leave you hanging between seasons, so we have a surprise for you this week. We're broadcasting a 3-episode special from the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas. Each day, guest host Hanish Patel will interview Deloitte colleagues and industry experts from some of the biggest names in tech. Hanish will be bringing you the hottest trends from CES and deciphering how these trends will affect your business in 2018 and beyond. Today, Hanish will be speaking about the future of advertising. Thanks for tuning in and enjoy the show.
Hi, this is Hanish Patel and welcome to User Friendly, recording from CES 2018. It's day one of the show and I'm here at the Deloitte Lounge space with Sharon Harris, Todd Paris from Deloitte and Tiffany Miller from Google to talk about what we're seeing at the show from advertising for both buyers and sellers. Tiffany, Todd, Sharon, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
All right, so guys, we've all been walking the show floor and visiting various exhibits at CES, and a number of new devices, gadgets, and technology just continues to grow and expand. It's astounding. Consumers are clearly getting more devices in every aspect of their life, from work to play to relationships to tasks around the house to entertainment. It's all here at CES. For an advertiser, this is a dream and no doubt a massive challenge. There are more and more touch points, and for content creators, there are more and more challenges to leverage. But one thing remains constant: great marketing begins and ends with the audience. To that end, I want to start with a question for you, Todd.
Sure.
How are brands and marketers going to reach these audiences given a number of devices, gadgets, and what seems like an endless number of touch points and content to engage with?
So that's the part of CES that I like. You were mentioning devices everywhere. There's devices and drones and TVs, connected TVs. There's so many different devices that we can all start to basically engage with in a very hyper-personal way. So the number one thing to do that, to be able to do that, is data, the underlying data currency. And that's, you're going to hear me say that again and again today. Data is that underlying basis. If we can collect all of these new data signals, think of IoT, smart cities, little devices, there's technology enabling that, there's sensors enabling that, there are devices that you're seeing here at CES enabling that as well. So being able to harvest all of that data and then unify that data and marry that back to the marketer side, that's where I think the magic happens.
Awesome. You said data quite a few times there, right?
I
and
paid to say data.
We've all heard about it for years now. Big data, data-driven marketing. What's different now? And why is this key to the future of advertising?
So the devices, there's so many devices. And you think of, again, this back to the smart cities, back to online, connected TV, OTT, all of these different types of data signals are really starting to pour in. And when you do that, then you appreciate the vastness of the data. But the difference today is that we're starting to actually understand and master the data. And so brands are starting to engage to understand what does that ID online mean to the TV world, the connected TV world, or OTT? What does that mean back to drones flying around that may be looking and watching you from a personal perspective?
I think to that point, though, Todd, when you mentioned marketing, consumers want relevant advertising. And consumers are really driving this push that I don't want to just see an ad about anything. I want to see an ad that's relevant, that's delivered to me in the right context, that has some value to me.
Right.
So I think you're starting to see, as the rise of user-generated content with social media, you're starting to see consumers really engage in that conversation with advertisers and marketers around, don't just show me any ad. Show me an ad that's going to give me some value. And I think that's what's pushing brands to really think about, how do we use that data? How do we manage it? How do we operate it more effectively, more efficiently, and be more intelligent with it?
Sounds good.
And the technologies that are in place, like the cloud service providers, that technology allows us to do that at scale. So now you can actually do hyper-targeting, but you can do that at scale, which are two things you wouldn't normally connect. Days of early programmatic, you targeted and the audience was so small, but now you can find that audience in so many places across so many different sites.
I think it's incredibly exciting, but it comes with, 1, responsibility, and 2, investment. So at Google, we think very conservatively in getting into PII and getting into how we aggregate and use this data, right? So from a consumer perspective, for me personally, when I walked through the floor and I saw all of these things, especially in now the competition to have the connected home, who's going to own that connected home experience? I see how useful it would be. You and I talked about it yesterday. What would it be like if our home was much more intelligent?
Yeah.
And would it make our lives easier? That comes with responsibility, right? So I think as marketers, we look at it from it's exciting, I can be hyper-personalized, but I need to be really thoughtful. And in order to mine that data, I need to think of it as an investment. And we're going to talk about that from an ad tech perspective, cost versus investment. And how do you really mine this data well for your brand, where you make it so that you delight me, you add value, you make my life seamless and easy, which I think part of it has that we've seen that from technology companies in the past 5 years, right?
And Tiffany, you mentioned something about PII there, right? And as a marketer, you want as much data as you can about me, you, everyone else out there, right? What about security? I, for one, would think about, are you listening in on me all the time, right? So where would the security aspect fit into that as well? And how much of a handcuff is that for you?
We've had a lot of these conversations within the walls of Google. I have it with my family, with the connected home. What is the trade-off, right? And I think from a consumer perspective, I will give you something if you give me something valuable back. But there is education. So consumer watch groups in terms of how do we manage this data? What is the responsibility? Where are policies that police it? There's, experiments, like you said, smart cities in thinking about the future of cities and how do we actually build policy and law that protects our data. But on the other hand, I'm willing to give up something if it's personalized. Right. And if my life is actually improved by you knowing a little bit of what I want.
Absolutely.
If I go back to what we said earlier about data, there's a hell of a lot of data, as you guys have already expressed, right? How does that fit into the enterprise and the organization? Who owns that?
Man, ownership of the data is the first step in actually democratizing the data that you have access to. And we're not just talking about your own CRM data, but it's the data that you can mine that is signed in user-based data versus probabilistic, where I'm just kind of like, I think, generally speaking, this is the trend of what my consumer wants, right? But getting to the heart of, I can actually mine intent data, marry that with what I know with my CRM data. What does that mean? So ownership comes into play pretty much at the beginning of any conversation with an enterprise. There's a cost to it, which is why earlier I said, are you viewing it as a cost or are you viewing it as an investment? If you're viewing it as a cost, it's going to be harder to convince your organization to take that up for ownership. But if you're viewing it as an investment 5-10 years out, what will be the future of your marketing, advertising, and sales practice? Then it's a no-brainer.
So the data ownership piece. So first-party data. So the primary owner is the creator of that data. CRM data oftentimes comes up as a classic first-party data. You should mine the heck out of that data. But you start to conflate it with second-party data, and Google can play, and there's a bit of a debate in terms of who plays where and what types of secondary data or second-party data. Then there's the third-party data, which we all kind of not differentiated highly, and there's different values associated with that. But you could, by knitting that together with permissions, with respect to PII, with security you were talking about a second ago, and that's the magic. That's where the insights really start to happen. So there's ownership, security, insights.
Yeah.
Got it.
And I think it's important to note, data hygiene is such a huge topic that I think sometimes goes undiscussed, because for a marketer, you've got first party, second party, third party data. You're commingling all of these data sources. How do you make sure that data is clean and the integrity is there? So one, you're not compromising that consumer. It's safe, it's secure, and ultimately you can use it in a way that you really need to use it without violating that trust that you have with the consumer. So that's a really big challenge for marketers right now. And I think we're starting to see marketers really begin to think more thoughtfully and more strategically around the integrity of the data.
And that gets to the technology point that you were sort of moving towards, I
Right.
believe, which is that hygiene, the data mastery, collecting all that data, integrating all that data, and then being able to parse it out and say what ID maps what deterministically or probabilistically. How do we actually take all that data and knit that together in a way that we can offer up the insights in real time, and then you overlay machine learning
Right.
and keep going down the path of more and more intelligence.
If you don't own it, it's like if you put it in the hands of a different organization, right? The responsibility to that data and the hygiene of that data falls on a whole nother set of motivations and or goals. When you own that data, you're now hiring differently. We'll talk about what organizations are asking us, right, on a week by week basis, and things are changing really fast. You're hiring differently. You are opening up all the advanced data analytics that you can within an organization, and you're looking at your marketing, sales, and advertising KPIs differently. And it's really powerful. So data as an investment, absolute primary ownership is really important.
So if I take a point that each one of you said, if I think about the ownership mindset, Tiffany, that you mentioned, Sharon, you talked about the whole hygiene aspect of it as well. And Todd, you mentioned technology. Let's put all of that in the mix. Does it really work?
Sure.
No, it has to.
It does.
Absolutely.
Right.
It's critical, mission critical to the future of advertising, or I would like to say current advertising, because I think enterprises don't fully understand what's available to them today.
They don't. And it is not easy to do what we're describing here casually. We just take the data and marry the data and monetize the data. So these technologies, like with respect to Google, with respect to other providers as well, though it does exist, to your point. And there's certain brands that are actually pushing forward, but people struggle just with the basics of data hygiene goes back a million years. And they were still struggling with data hygiene, let alone kind of the more advanced components of that all the way through the analytics. So does it work? Yes. Are brands already there? Not so much quite yet. So it's not as sexy to talk about this from a future point of view. But this that we're talking about here is the 18-month, 24-month thing that needs to happen, I think, to really kind of start to light up the advertising and the monetization.
I'd love to share with you it's very unsexy, but it's very effective. So I've been with Google 15 years. 13 of it was on the O&O side for search and YouTube, right? And you know the power of search. But when I made the pivot to the sort of the ad tech side of the business with DoubleClick, the one piece the first thing that really stood out for me was how underutilized ad serving data has been for the last 10 years, right? We see it as kind of utilitarian. I serve my ad, I traffic it. But the amount of just basic marketing campaign data, if the data hygiene is good, if your ad serving structure is good and sound, which we make the recommendations, right? Then the insights that come back, especially in this world where we're trying to combat ad fraud, for example, within the video space, is highly important. And I've seen many marketers within our space for the last year starting to really look at ad serving data in a real way and consolidating their ad servers so that they can actually glean viewability, fraud, frequency. That's kind of basic and unsexy, but it's been very useful.
Yeah. I think we're really getting there. I mean, I think we're still to some extent in the early stages, and that speaks to just the maturity of the talent in the market and understanding how to really utilize the data. And I think it's also a bit of shedding the mindset around what advertising is. I think people only think of the glamorous, sexy, shooting a TV commercial, being on set, but it's really now that blend of the art with the science. And how do you use this data to be smarter about the creative elements that you build, smarter about the conversations you engage with consumers on, and also just to be smarter about how you position your brand in the marketplace. That's what the data is really allowing you to do. And I think you're going to see marketers really evolve get more sophisticated and much more strategic about how they approach the data, from the hygiene to the mastery to the ownership and the actual usage of that data. I often tell people, I think of data as the new oil, particularly for the publisher side of the house. Publishers now are really beginning to understand the value of that data in driving revenue for their content. But it's taken a really long time because before there was always this sort of time-honored tradition. The home page is where I make my money, and not really understanding that, no, there are sections of the site, of the video that actually resonate better with my audiences. And those are the places that I need to monetize more effectively. So we're starting to see things really grow and evolve.
So I love what you said there, Sharon, about getting smart. And you touched upon the content publisher to a certain degree. We talked a fair bit about the brand, the marketer, and the focus on that, right? So I'd love for you to explore a bit more about what is it that a website owner or a content publisher really needs to do, and the thinking that they need to have to make themselves attractive to buyers.
I think for, the content providers out there and the publishers, this has really been an all-up disruption in many respects, because it's been about, one, how do I really simplify my portfolio? You don't need thousands of ad offerings. You need the top 10 that are really going to resonate with that audience, and you need to understand your audience first and foremost by leveraging that data, understanding what content works for them, what's the most appealing, where are they spending their time. And then you really have to take that and build that into your overall strategy for not only how you develop the content, but how you monetize the content. Because for a publisher, you don't want any single impression wasted or lost. You want to monetize every single impression that comes to your site, every single video view, every single click is really $1. So it's all about, how do you build an organization that understands it's not about us. It's about, what does my advertiser need? What is my audience really looking for? And really understanding how to build a model that optimizes and maximizes that relationship. And I think you're starting to see publishers once again sort of really reevaluate what their place is. Because with the rise of things like user-generated content, many of the publishers have, to some extent, really retreated. And you've started to see a lot of them really sort of almost run scared, because they're like, oh my God, consumers are just going to build all of this themselves. Do they really need us? And that's where I think you're starting to see content really step it up.
Yeah.
You're starting to see higher quality content, more relevant content, but you're starting to see those publishers say, wait a minute, I need to use this data on what my consumers are doing to inform the content that we develop.
I have a question. So from a publisher perspective, protecting that content and ensuring that your brand is exposed, or is people can have access to it and can trust that this is real. From a fraud perspective, what are you hearing from the publishers?
Well, fraud's a huge thing. I
I know.
It is, I think that has become, between the fake news, that's really the buzz of the industry. And I think you're starting to see publishers really take a hard look at how the content's developed, how it's distributed, ensuring that it really is authentic, and really trying to develop content that really aligns well with their brands, and not sort of veering off into other areas where you get things that may not be true to their brand DNA. And I think that's where technology is really coming into play, around how do you, one, ensure that you're building brand safe content? How do you ensure that there's true viewability? How do you ensure that you're not taking in content from an unauthorized source? Because there is so much user generated content. There are bots out there. There are people who are spending years and days just building technically fake news. How do you protect yourself from that? And that's really where the technology has become incredibly useful for publishers, in terms of how do we protect our brand and build a really solid, content platform. So that's what you're starting to see more and more of. And I think it's going to continue to grow, is there now more and more attacks on the content.
Nobody wants fraud, right? It's bad for business, but it's taken some time to get everyone on the same wagon. Wagon?
Bus.
We're in the West.
We're in the West, exactly.
Wagon.
Still right.
So then, from what I'm hearing, more and more it sounds like the lines are really blurring from the buy and the sell side, right? And clearly, from what we've been talking about, data's the new currency in all of this, right?
Yes.
Able through technology. Is that what's really happening? It is getting blurred, and it's all about the data.
Yes.
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 So,
I'm going to say no simply because everyone's saying yes.
So if you look at some of the big categories, right, in retail, in entertainment, even in telecom, now CPG, maybe even CE, if marketers as brands are building content, and they're also on one end, they're now sell side. Retailers are gonna go out and go to the OEMs and say, all right, like we have a lot of data, we're gonna share it with you now. Co-op marketing is changing. Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So then on the flip side is, they're also customers of buying advertising to target for folks to go on their website. So we're talking about democratization of data on the back end. And if you have the right system and the same system, then you truly have a single view of the user journey. And it's the same person that's coming to your site. It's the same person that is actually buying offline. And we get to the whole identity piece.
Unified ID.
So you've all said yes to data being the currency. But let me throw something out there. For as long as I can remember, I've always heard the saying, content is king, right?
Sure.
So that being said, in the future of advertising, where is the content? And how are the experiences really being created? Because content is all about creating that experience. So how are they really being created then?
I don't think anything's really changed there. I mean, content is still the king.
Right.
Hands down. But what I think data is telling you is the context, that's the kingdom. That's where that king is sitting. And without having the right context, the king doesn't have as much power.
Is that the kingdom or is that the queen?
Clearly,
Could I make the queen?
Yes.
Behind every great man. Because it really sets the stage for that's where your real power comes from, is understanding that data, understanding that audience. And, with content, we're getting smarter about it in terms of how it's getting built, who the audiences are, what's resonating with them. I mean, when you think about the rise of, over-the-top television, and you see how Netflix has just blown everyone away with this amazing content, it's that art and science. It's understanding the data. What are consumers really looking for? What kind of images do they want to see reflected on their televisions? And now we've got a completely new world where people are really being pushed on developing much higher quality content, but understanding that really where that data sits and how do I build something that's relevant to my audiences, that speaks to them, that's compelling, and that ultimately at the end of the day is really going to drive my revenue streams.
Yeah, let's talk about Netflix, right? So they take personalization, they take data for personalization, for customized creative in promoting all of those shows to the next level. And what we see in the marketplace with a lot of acquisitions and consolidations is looking at, okay, how do we do what the Netflix has done? What you see for an ad for any given show, The Crown, Narcos, what have you, will be different from what I see. And so last year, with Narcos, for example, right, they're taking all of their shows global. And that's really where you have to play to be competitive. Specifically for Narcos, they used data, they used machine learning, they used everything that they can actually throw in their algorithm to say, actually, in South America, the imagery that the consumers respond best to are beautiful photos of Colombia, right? And they're so proud of their country. This is part of the heritage, it's part of the history. Whereas in the States, we're much more into the nefarious part of the story, of course, the kingpin, the drugs. And so you'll see the ads of targeting the U.S. consumer. It will be kind of a hard
Pablo
features,
Escobar's
Pablo,
face with
cocaine
the
flying
sunglasses.
everywhere in
Yes.
slow motion. Whereas in South America, he's smiling, there's a mountain backdrop. They tested that, and they have a test and learn culture. But because the foundation layer is data.
So, there's one underlying component of that, a critical component of that, which is Netflix is one of the preeminent leaders in taking their media in-house. So they've gone to great lengths actually to change their relationship with the agency, and in doing that, they've taken control of the data. And once they've got that data, they can start to do and own their own insights. So people that are currently working kind of in the model, the agency model, interesting to note is that most of them don't own their own data or that advertising data. And that's making for an interesting dynamic in the marketplace. Netflix is a leader in terms of taking that ownership, taking the paper, the direct control of the ad server of a lot of their different vendors that they actually engage with. And it allows them to do the type of targeting exactly that you're talking about.
They moved incredibly fast. They hired incredibly fast. What would you say to the non-Netflixes of the world, in terms of hiring for that expertise, operating in this model?
Yeah, and this is where most our clients are now talking about this quite a bit. How do we change the ownership structure of all of the insights? That's the typical place we start the conversation. And we're not saying, hey, take ownership of all of it immediately, dynamically change and restructure the entire agency relationship. It's a matter of kind of moving towards a bit of a hybrid model where ownership of the data, ownership of the insights, and the ability then to staff analytics, data engineers, data scientists. That's a challenge for any brand. And so it's kind of an incremental 1 year, 2 year, 3 year process. And the agency becomes still a very strategic component of the entire process, but they become another vendor that they have within their suite of vendors. So
I mean, listeners out there, your kids going to college, they should learn data science. Because there are lots of jobs out there in the next 10 years.
That's right, exactly.
So Tiffany, I'd like to go back to what you said about data ownership. You said a fair bit about the importance of that. And Todd, you talked about the mindset, and Sharon, you talked about, again, that hygiene aspect of that, right? If I look at what's going on the show floor here at CES, there's so much going on about AI and machine learning. Where does machine learning and artificial intelligence play into, one, what the marketer and advertiser can do with that, and two, from a consumer perspective, how can you really get that personalization and consistency that a consumer is probably looking for?
Let's talk about a business case that happened last year. This was a campaign launched for Toyota RAV4 in partnership with Watson. And the challenge was, all right, we talk a lot about machine learning. Let's put it to the test, right? Now, to be fair, machine learning is everywhere. It's already computing within your advertising campaigns. If you do it right, and if you're using the right tech, right now you can do real-time optimization. You don't have to wait for 30 days or 6 months to get campaign data back, right? But the RAV4 example, I thought it was really interesting because they went and used Watson to comb all of the web for RAV4 enthusiasts, and the imagery and the language and the way that people talk about the brand and the product. And it spit back just a bunch of words. And now machine learning plus the human component, like we know in order to process this much data, machine learning has to catch up. But in the meantime, for these guys, what they did was they used human beings, because we're still part of this equation. For now. No, I like to think that we will play the strategy and the vision with the data versus a lot of kind of hands-on keyboard work that we do today.
Yeah.
So things will change, but they had human interaction where it's like they took chunks and themes of this data. What made sense? They kept in Watson. What didn't? They threw out. And in the end, the personalized creative messaging that came out was in the voice of the enthusiast. And it was quite frankly something that would take so much time for a human creative to come up with, because it's impossible to mine that much data. And combine that together, they came out with something really great. And that, look, it's expensive, it's not easy to do, but it's available. I thought that was a really good example of using current machine learning for advertising purposes.
And if I look forward on ML, and people are doing this in marketplace now, is they're taking the learnings from ML. In today's world or yesterday's world, you had the insights, and now you had to go hands on keyboard and actually dive and go buy on platforms. Today or tomorrow, you'll be able to take those insights. You're going to integrate those insights into a recommendation engine, into the actual auto buy. And so people won't have to have that, I'm jumping over to Excel and I'm now building my line by line. The machines will actually move from insights to recommendation to activating on different buying platforms. And that'll be a great step forward.
And they did that with our G Suite product, which is we're trying to get subscriptions, right? And so we give a free trial, hoping you like it, then you'll subscribe. Typical cross-channel online, offline marketing. But in terms of the insights we were getting back, it was a lag time of 30 to 60 days. Pumping in machine learning and using some of the products that we have in market, within 2 days of the campaign, we put an algorithm score on how likely will this person actually convert from a trial to a subscription.
Yep.
And that is a bucket that we're going to focus our marketing dollars.
Yeah.
Right. And that's available today, which I think is very
and for
exciting.
the marketer,
Absolutely.
that's amazing because it's, pushing marketers to be much more agile and to really not just say, hey, this campaign's going to run for a month, but to really do that amazing thing with the consumer. Listen to what the consumer wants.
Yeah.
That's the beauty of what this technology and all this data is really pushing. Marketers before have always just been pushing out messages with no regard for what a consumer really wants. But now through machine learning, through AI, it's now about listen, take in what that consumer's looking for, and then deliver back to something that they're really going to want, something they're going to use, and ultimately convert on.
Yep. And machine learning, AI, it's becoming a service. It is a service. So they'll give you ready-made models, TensorFlow, and Google in particular. They'll give you the models and a little bit of training, and you start to flow your data, and those insights start to happen. So it's actually becoming easier and easier to do as well.
Right. I mean, like I said, we're seeing a lot of that on the show floor. And, machine learning, AI feels very now. I want to put you all in a bit of a time machine. And fast forward a couple of years, we've talked about data at the center. We've talked about technology, creativity, the experiences all meshing together. What are your big predictions for the future?
Ooh, well, I'll take a look at it from the consumer standpoint. I think you're going to see more and more consumers almost curate their own advertising. And I think it's going to be to an even greater degree. We already see it with AI and machine learning, but now you're going to see consumers say, I want to see ads that are more like this, that are more representative of me, that have images that represent me, that are in a region of the world that I want to be in, that aspire to a lifestyle that I want to have. And you're starting to see glimmers of that now, but I think that's going to become more accelerated with time. And that's really going to force marketers to listen more and be much, much more thoughtful about how they develop marketing campaigns and really bring that art and science together.
And I would add to that, too, is that if you look at I started with IoT a while ago. So people experience brands in different locations, in different places, not just online, not just on your handset. So when you add in the sensors and collect all of that data across all the physical locations, so bring digital intelligence to physical locations, then you can actually start to really engage where we all live and breathe and experience brands, which is minute to minute, day to day across our lives, not just at a PC or at a TV.
Which, from a marketer perspective, it will continue to get more complicated in terms of how you mine this data. So looking at what Intel announced, right? Quantum computing, putting sensors everywhere. From an entertainment perspective, they're going to be big in terms of partnership with the Winter Olympics. They're going to be looking at the ability for the user, the viewer, to adjust the angle and be part of the action. Beyond live sports, right? You're looking at advertising and or content where you, as the viewer, can actually feel like you're part of the story, and you can choose the vantage point and the storyline that you want to be a part of. That has massive implications as to the types of data we're going to be able to collect. So the four of us here watching the same movie or experiencing the same marketing content, we're going to view it, we're going to engage with it differently. So what does that mean when you collect that data for future campaigns? And what does it mean when you're marketing to me for your product and solutions?
Got it. So in that time machine I talked about we're in, I think what I'm hearing is there's going to be an incredible amount of more data available for you, the marketer, for you, the brand, to really push to me that I'm going to choose how to curate. And there's going to be a hell of a lot more sensors out there that are going to be picking up on my emotions of whether I'm happy with what you've just pushed to me. Would that be a fair assessment of what the world could look like for us?
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment for sure.
All right. All right. So that's it, I'd say, for day one for us at CES and our podcast series. Tiffany, Sharon, Todd, thanks so much for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
That's it for day one of User Friendly's 3-episode special from CES. Tomorrow, Hanish will be back with new guests and more trends from the show. See you then.